Our scripture for the morning is found in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verses 11 through 34, which reads, By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom was said, In Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob, and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel, and gave instructions concerning his bones. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, and Barak, and Samson, and Jephthah, and also of David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, and turned to flight the arms of the aliens. May God's blessings come upon the readers and doers of his word. We note here this morning that we have a very substantial list of worthies, notable people in the history of God's church. And today we're going to look to some of them as an example of how we can better find our place in God's vineyard. This is the second part of a two-part series of Finding a Natural Vibe, or Your Place in God's Vineyard. Remember last week we noted a couple of principles. The first one is that the place where you belong in God's vineyard, the place where you're going to be most fulfilled and happy, is where one that matches up with your personality, with your personal gifts and attributes. And the second point is you need to know yourself. You need to understand yourself in order to seek this place where you will be most fulfilled and do the best work for God. We noted last week the vineyard. It's here used today. It is figurative, not literal, but there certainly were literal vineyards which exist today and were referred to a number of times in Scripture, as we see this worker here, who's our figurative example to us. There's a vineyard, where's our place? And when we also learned last week that just like a guitar has strings that are designed to resonate at certain frequencies, each of us have personalities. We have differences in the way we made up. There's some things we're going to be good at, some things we're not. And God does not want you to be miserable. He wants you to find your place, what's good and natural for you. And when you find that place, work and do for the Lord. Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we want to continue our learning today because we want to be good servants of yours. Bless the speaker now, bless the listeners. May all of us come to a better understanding of your personal, individual will for us so we can be your servants. Do your work and hasten your coming. In Christ's name we ask it. Amen. So this week, in the second part, we're going to focus not on the principles of personality and learning, but rather on the individual characters in the Bible, to see if there's one that we can identify with. We start with Joseph. Joseph was, we know, a patriarch. We start reading about him in the 37th chapter of Genesis, and it continues on. There's a lot said about him. He was the favorite son of the patriarch Jacob, who had 12 sons. Joseph was the youngest of the sons. He was favored. And it's not uncommon that when families have multiple children, that one of them, often a younger one, will become a favorite, which tends to inspire jealousy among the other siblings. Not a good thing, but it's natural. It occurs often, and it was true in this family. The favoritism toward Joseph by Jacob was expressed by making a very special coat for him, which was made with many colors. Realize everything then was done by hand. It was difficult to find colorants, and particularly to have a bunch of different bright colors in one garment was very unusual because of the difficulty. So this special love for the youngest son was expressed in this manner, and it could be seen by all. It was very public, very obvious. The other brothers did not like it. Joseph had another characteristic. He had dreams, and he was able to understand dreams. As a child, he had some very strange dreams. And the significant part of the dreams, which really upset his brothers, was that in these dreams he saw them bowing down to him, which is entirely contrary to a person's sense of ego, which many people have, and also to customs in most cultures and families, wherein the older members get more respect and are expected to be followed by the younger ones. Well, here he had dreams showing the exact opposite, which caused consternation. Nobody could understand it, and it caused even more resentment by his brothers. They didn't like this. Eventually, they found an opportunity when they were out to set up a scheme where they pretended he was torn by wild animals, but they actually sold him into slavery, fortunately, because they were on the point of killing him. But God was with Joseph. God had plans for him, and he was favored of God. And after he was sold as a slave, he was traded up a couple times. You know, slaves like property, so you can sell them for more money to somebody else. You oftentimes would do that. So this was Joseph's fortunate experience because he ended up in the house of Pharaoh. Matter of fact, he was so blessed and so good at being a steward and husbanding resources and directing things that after a while he ended up being like second in the kingdom. The wife of the Pharaoh saw this young, handsome, strong man. He's intelligent. He's good at doing things. She started looking at him and saying, I'd like to bear down with this guy. Joseph, being a man of principle and being raised properly, would have nothing to do with that. But the woman kept badgering him, and eventually an occasion came where he just had to run away from her. She was grabbing him. She wanted him lustfully. But he left his coat behind, and then she got revenge on him. She did dirt on him by using this as supposed evidence that Joseph was trying to rape her. Very untrue, but the Pharaoh was in a position, so he had to send Joseph to prison, even though he wasn't convinced that Joseph had done anything wrong. So Joseph ended up in prison, and he had interesting experiences there. Again, because of his favor of God and his ability to work with people and lead, he ended up being second in command in the jail. Even though he's a prisoner, the slaves, we notice a number of times in the Bible, weren't always treated like awful, good-for-nothing, but manual labor people, as was common here in the United States. Oftentimes, they were able to, depending on their ability, to advance to fairly significant positions. And this was the experience of Joseph, even in prison. So God was with him, blessed him. The occasion came when a couple of fellow prisoners had dreams. Joseph was able to interpret the dreams. One interpretation wasn't very favorable, and he lost his life, as Joseph had interpreted. In the other case, the other person was restored to his position. And Joseph asked, "Hey, when you get back to the king's court, remember me." Well, he forgot. He was forgotten, and so he languished in prison for more time. Eventually, the time came when the Pharaoh had a dream, and he wanted it to be interpreted. And dreams are very important to people in their societies back then. Nobody can interpret it, but then finally the general remembered, yeah, there's a guy down in prison that can interpret dreams. So they brought Joseph out, and Joseph was able to interpret that dream. And as a result of that, he ended up being restored to a high position, again, second in the kingdom. And as part of this, what happened is the dream was interpreted regarding a time of famine, of starvation in Egypt, which did come to pass, again, as a true interpretation would be. And the family of Joseph came to Egypt looking for food. So it did end up that his brothers and his family ended up bowing to him because he was next to Pharaoh in the kingdom. You wanted food, just as where you had to go. So the dreams were all fulfilled, and it did happen as Joseph saw in it. Joseph was confident, a man of principle, as he demonstrated, with a strong moral compass, so that he was able to overcome adversity. He was not afraid to share his beliefs because he followed a higher cause. He loved God. And as a man of integrity, he was afraid of being seen, even to be slightly dishonest. The other side of Joseph's personality, besides being organized, is that he was to the point of being perfectionist, which can be too much for some people, and you spend too much time dealing with details and not really getting a big job done because you're too focused on the details. He was willing to sacrifice. He's well disciplined, but unemotional to the point that he was afraid of his feelings and could seem cold at times. He's easily frustrated other people. A person like this can be angry, but instead of expressing it some way, they may internalize it, which is good for ulcers, but not for resolving a situation. And advice to the next person I'd like to consider is Abraham, who's been called the father of nations, because the promise made him that his descendants would be like the stars of heaven. In other words, very numerous. But this promise is unfulfilled when Abraham was reaching retirement age. His wife has been barren, there have been no children, and he kept asking the question, where's the son? After a while, his wife said to him, well, why not go into my maid? You know, she's young, she's fertile, we can have a kid by her. And the idea was to help God out to make sure the promise was fulfilled, which is not what a person should do. But it was an easy thing for a man to go along with it. You go into a young maid, you know, your wife says, okay, it's okay. So they had the son that way, but it wasn't the son of promise. Afterwards, God made a covenant with Abraham, and the sign of this covenant was to circumcise the child, the male child, on the 8th day. So this is the beginning of this practice among the Jews, which continues to this day. Eventually, he did have a son by his wife, the son of promise, and many progeny after that. Test along the way. God came up with a test for him to test his faith, which was that he was going to take this only begotten son, the one he finally had, he was supposed to have, take him up into the mountains and sacrifice him. Now, obviously, the son was also obedient. I mean, if you had a young son and you're pushing 100 years old, you couldn't force him onto a pile of wood to sacrifice and set him on fire. So obviously there was teaching of obedience to God in this family, which was carried out both by the father and the son. So the father took the son up, put him on the pile of wood. He's raising knives, he's ready to slay him, you know, obeying God in faith, even though without his son, this promise cannot be fulfilled. That was a real test of faith. But an angel stopped him, and God provided an alternate substitute. That was Abraham's faith expressed, for which he's known to this day. Abraham was a generous person. He was full of faith, and he looked toward other people. He had great flocks, which is the economic foundation of their society at that time. The people had flocks. They looked for grasslands where the flocks could graze. So God had blessed him. He had great flocks. And he also had a nephew named Lot who had great flocks. And after a while, they realized there just wasn't enough land to graze. You need a certain amount of acreage and grass per animal. When you get a lot of animals, you need more room. Our ranchers out in the western United States experience this all the time. They need many acres because the land is dry. Well, here the land wasn't so dry. The time came, they just said, hey, we need more room. And Abraham said to Lot, you choose. He gave the choice of what was best or appeared to be best to his nephew Lot. He didn't take it for himself, which was very generous of him. Abraham and people of this personality, they're good listeners. They care, they're sincere about other people. They can see good in them and meet their needs. They're also straight up and transparent. Something I see in myself, but I don't see in many people nowadays, especially politicians. They say one thing, they talk one game, but the reality is something different. A person with this type of personality wants to be wanted and loved, and most people do, but it's stronger in a person with this type of personality, and they're afraid of that. So they end up working themselves to the bone, trying to please other people, and also they may be expecting rewards for their actions. You know, people like something good to happen, but this desire is stronger with this type of personality. Along with this, you know, they do things for other people, and you can get a little inflated, feel self-important, and feel, you owe me, I've done these things for you. The advice to give for a person with this type of personality is ask for help sometimes and say thanks. Those are good things. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham and a twin to Esau, who was a hunter. He was a successor to Abraham for the promise which flowed through Isaac. One day Esau had been out hunting unsuccessfully. He came home starving, extremely hungry, and found that his brother Jacob had prepared a very large pot of savory stew. It smelled so good. But unlike a good brother, Jacob was not willing to share with him. He wanted something. So it ended up that Esau sold his birthright to Jacob in order to get a pot of stew. This is an extremely disrespectful thing to do. Birthright was a very special thing. We don't relate to it, but back then, this was the favored position that the firstborn had and entitled him to a double portion of the inheritance. To sell it for a pot of stew was extremely disrespectful, almost inconceivable thing to do. Now Rebecca, the mother, was a deceitful person like Jacob was. She wanted to make sure that Jacob kept this birthright, which properly belonged to his brother Esau. So upon the death of the father, she connived with Jacob to make him appear to be Esau, who was properly get the deathbed blessing. They did this by putting some pieces of fur on the back of the hands of Jacob, so he'd appear to be a hairy person like his brother Esau. So when Esau was out hunting for a wild animal to prepare a special meal for his father, as he had been requested to do, Jacob jumped in with the assistance of Rebekah and served some meat which had been prepared from a domesticated animal. It wasn't a wild animal at all. Isaac was fairly deaf, rather blind at that point, and he had doubts what was going on, but he ended up giving the blessing to Jacob, which properly belonged to Esau. When Esau returned from hunting, he found out what had gone on, and he was extremely incensed. The family became full of hate. Jacob had to flee for his life. Eventually things were smoothed over, but none of this needed to happen if it weren't for the deceitful behavior on the part of these two. Jacob had a dream one night wherein he saw a ladder appear and extend from the earth to heaven, and angels ascending and descending. This is commonly remembered nowadays in the song, "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder." He had a relative named Laban who had two daughters, Leah, who was not so attractive, and Rachel, who was. He made an agreement with Laban to work for 7 years for the hand of Rachel. So he did so and married. The next morning he found out that he'd married Leah, the one he didn't want, and not Rachel. We can understand how this might have happened, considering the customs of women in that part of the world to be veiled or have their faces covered. And also there could have been factors of darkness and consumption of alcohol. He had to work another 7 years to get Rachel, so at the end of 14 years he had the wife he wanted, plus another one which he didn't want. So you could say what goes around came around in his case. He could be said to have gotten a little bit of revenge there. I realized this guy is always manipulating for himself. When it came time to separate the flocks, he manipulated so that the animals that he would get would be much more numerous, and the ones that would stay with Laban would be not so numerous. He had an incident one night where he ended up wrestling with an angel. The theologians tell us this was God, but he wouldn't let go of the angel until he was blessed. He eventually was blessed, but not until his hip had been struck, which left him limping for the rest of his life. There's another significant incident when his sister Dinah was raped by members of another tribe. He got with them, and they agreed to make recompense, including being circumcised. Being circumcised for an adult male is a very uncomfortable thing, and kind of puts you out of action for a while. It's not a minor thing like it is for a baby that's still quite young and in the process of rapidly growing. He took advantage of this situation of the men being rather discomfited by getting with his brothers and slaying the whole bunch of them, which is a totally wrong thing to do. As a result of this, they had to flee again, but he still had been promised Abraham's land, and God renamed him as Israel, the name by which the Hebrews from then are still known as by now, and it's the name of the current country. He was a very talented guy, a hard worker, but he used any, by hook or by crook, was fine with him. If he gets me forward, accomplishes my plans, I'm doing it. So God loved him, his brother hated him, and he actually beat Angel at wrestling. He was a guy that strategized. He made plans to move forward. And whatever the obstacles were, he'd overcome them. Hard worker, full of energy. People would follow after them. People saw him as being gracious because he performed well, and he looked to be admired by other people. People like this sometimes work so hard they can exhaust themselves because they're trying to please other people and not trying to please God, and they can be self-centered. They want to get what they want rewards, and they don't have a strong sense of morality at all. So admitting when they're wrong, no, that's hard. Someone comes to them with a message, they don't listen too well. A person like this can get kind of superficial in relationships with other people. They feel threatened very quickly, and they need more humility and patience. And the truth is not something they're too good with, and nor is sharing, their real selves. They want to put up an image, look good, and be appreciated by other people. David was first mentioned post-birth as a future king. He was a very spirit-filled person. He was the youngest of 8 sons, and as we noticed in a societal pattern, then they don't get a lot of respect. He was loved by Saul the king because he was able to play the harp, which Saul the king found to be very soothing. The Israelites at that time were plagued by the Philistines, a pagan tribe that worshipped Dagon. They had a giant named Goliath who was constantly badgering the Israelites for someone to fight him, man to man, one-on-one. But nobody would do this because he was such a giant. He inspired fear in everybody. David was inspired by God to fight him. He did so. He slew him. But after this, he got a lot of respect and commendations for people, which caused Saul the king to become jealous of him. And this jealousy developed into hatred. He tried to kill David, and finally David was on the run. He was a hunted man trying to stay ahead of the armies of the king. During this process, David had the opportunity twice to take Saul's life, which is something most people would have done. But David had an extreme degree of respect for the position of king, and even though he was prophesied to be the future king, so he could simply be taking the position promised to him, he would not touch the hand of God's anointed, as he put it. At one point, he fled to the Philistines. He pretended to be a crazy person in order to get away from Saul. And after a while, he came back and he beat them again. They didn't trust him, but they allowed him refuge there for a period of time. After he became king, his son Absalom rebelled. He did not pay a lot of attention to his sons and how they were developing and what they were doing. At one point, they lost the ark, which was to the Philistines, which was the most valuable possession that the Israelites had. It was a source of blessing to them, but the Philistines found it was a curse, and they sent it back, which resulted in an ecstatic celebration on the part of David. He's very well known for the fact that he committed adultery with Bathsheba, an attractive woman that he observed from the heights of the palace one evening bathing. So he called for her, he committed adultery with her, he had her husband killed, and took her as another wife. But this, of course, is very sinful. God punished him for it, and he's remembered for this. He also had to deal with the rebellion by Adonijah. David was a very passionate person. He was strong, creative, and loved. He was king of Israel for 40 years, a man after God's own heart. He started as a shepherd, he served as a musician, he was quite a warrior, but also a worshiper and a writer. He was an intuitive, expressive type of person, had a lot of feeling and compassion. A person like this can feel deeply, but also be plagued with self-doubt, looking for meaning and significance. he appreciated beautiful things and was loved to create. He was a true persona. Wasn't a person who carried on and tried to look like something, and he emphasized very well. David was a person who knew to seek God in every situation, something we should do. With the very passionate feelings that he had for things, he experienced reality in a heightened manner compared to most people. But along with the tendency of a person's type of personality to have strong feelings, there can be difficulty in controlling them. And when things go negative, grudge holding can take place. A person like David needs to trust God to make things right and not get stuck in the past or allow oneself to become angry at yourself. It's also easy to become envious of others and just discontented. Advice to a person with this type of personality is God loves you as you are, so practice self-discipline. Luke is only mentioned 3 times in the Bible. Even though he wrote one of the Gospels, he was a physician, he was an educated person. He was a Greek who wrote for the Gentiles. It's believed by many theologians that the 4 Gospels were not all written for the same audience, that Luke was written by a Gentile for Gentiles. Obviously, he was a historian and a researcher because he was not one of the apostles. He did not walk with Christ to have the first-person observations like John and Matthew did. So what he wrote came from other sources, but he did a very good job of research to find out all these details. He's commonly called an evangelist. He ended up accompanying Paul on his travels as a fellow laborer. So he wrote one of the Gospels, also the book of Acts. And in terms of volume, pages, words, he actually wrote more than Paul, even though Paul wrote the most books in the New Testament. His book, his Gospel, is the most detailed. He really went into details about it and looked for the evidence and the facts of Jesus' life, which he wrote down. So he was a thorough, studious. People like this value knowledge. They're objective. They don't let their feelings color things. They look at the facts and evidence as to what it is. So they're not going to follow the crowd as some other personalities do, very influenced by what people feel or think or want. Now, a person like this, they're sensible. They've got good judgment, and they ask questions. Why? Why did this happen? They also tend to not to have a whole bunch of friends, but rather a small number of deeper friendships. The opposite side of a personality like this is the person wants to be accurate and correct. So sometimes they overthink things, and if things aren't right, they're unsettled. They're not happy about it. They like good arguments, logic and reasoning things out. They can see the answers and understand situations. But they may not be satisfied with their own work because it just doesn't measure up sometimes. And they're okay being by themselves, when they relate to other people, because they're educated, because they're knowledgeable, sometimes they end up looking down to other people. Not good, but it tends to come with the personality. So they may become a little self-important. Advice to a person like this is, you don't always have to be the expert. Just listen some more, spend more time around people instead of by yourself, and be more positive. Timothy is another Bible character we know. He was a young disciple who assisted Paul, accompanied him on several journeys, and was instructed by Paul via 2 letters, which we call 1st and 2nd Timothy. His mother was Jewish and his father was Greek, so he was mixed. He was crossed over. You may remember, if you study the New Testament well, that there was a decision situation whether he should be circumcised or not, and because it was straddling 2 cultures. He actually ended up being so for the same purpose, so that he could straddle cultures and be more effective at evangelizing. He helped write some of the other books. 1st and 2nd Timothy were written to him, but he helped write the Corinthians, Philippians, Colossians, the Thessalonians, and Philemon. He was dispatched by Paul to work at various churches and ended up becoming the bishop of the church of Ephesus. A person like this is committed, they're loyal, they're enthusiastic. willing to endure difficulties. And it certainly was difficult being evangelists like Paul and Timothy and Barnabas and the others at that time, but they were committed to Christ. A person like this believes in the cause, even more than themselves. They put the cause first. Just being steadfast, they're responsible, but they're also warm toward others, having a good discernment of what the situation, when you come to, for example, when Timothy came to church, he could discern what was going on and see what the right choices were that need to be made. What happened then and what happens now in our lives sometimes, if you make the right choices, sometimes you end up by yourself because so many other people are not willing to do that. So his life was consistent. He wasn't a quitter, he was dependable. The opposite side of a personality like Timothy is that you may not have a lot of self-confidence, which means sometimes you procrastinate, you avoid doing what you ought to do, or you blame other people. And somebody get a little angry and testy with people, difficult to deal with. And sometimes you can end up feeling overwhelmed. You can deal with some stress, but where's the out? Where's the solution? Where's the end of it? Solomon was the wisest person in the world. He was the son of David and succeeded him as king. He did a lot of good things during his reign. He put down enemies, he made treaties with others, he wasn't fighting all the time. The reign of Solomon was a time of peace. He ruled wisely. So the nation was prosperous during that time because they weren't fighting everybody. He had a problem, though, with a weakness for women. And the women were worldly. He did not distinguish, as the Bible counsels us, to seek mates who love God as we do. He was unequally yoked, and of course, as a king in the culture back then, there had many women, many wives, many concubines, and these worldly women led him toward worshiping idols, which was a major problem for a significant part of his life. He was, wise as we just learned. He's inventive, very intelligent and successful. He built beautiful things such as the temple, which God had him build. David was not allowed to build it because he was a warrior. When God asked him what blessing he would like, he chose wisdom. And God was very pleased with this. And the consequences of this following on were that he acquired a lot of wealth and power. And he was a righteous judge, which was his objective when he asked for wisdom. But his curiosity led to some bad choices. And these false gods that he ended up worshiping, which when the king worshipped something, it had a consequent effect throughout the entire society. He left a great legacy, but the idolatry was bad. A person like this, they're playful, they're optimistic, they like to do things, adventurous. And because they're so practical, they're versatile, doing all sorts of things, that they can get in a roll and like nothing stands in their way. They keep on going. Like an adventure, but then of course they don't like boredom and they don't like things that just don't seem to matter. And they want satisfaction. Don't deal with pain very well. They love freedom, resist constraints. That's something we see in young people very commonly. But when you're an adult, you should outgrow some of this. But a person like this may not. A person like this is focused on the present, not the long run. So they don't make plans. They decide to go. Hey, it's like a lot of teenagers. Hey, let's go here tonight. Off they go. It wasn't part of a plan. And they learn quickly. They do experience gratitude, thankfulness for things. They enjoy simple things. And people, and they enjoy you. They're not grudge holders. They forgive and forget. But there's a bad side to them. If you can do a little bit of everything, you may not be terribly good at anything. And you may end up in a situation where you see all these options. Well, which one? That may be a challenge for them. Of course, if you don't choose a direction and push in it, you're probably not going to accomplish a whole lot. They can get real busy. They can get real busy and stressed and work hard, but the real issues, may get overlooked. Is it busy doing this? You're busy doing that, but there's something serious over here, like maybe the roof's leaking and you want to go out and party. And real issues don't get dealt with. And they can be greedy and just overdo things sometimes because they're not satisfied. We have Samson, strongest man who ever lived. God had intended for him to be a savior for the Israelites, to give them victory over the Philistines that were oppressing them, which went on for years and years. And he was outraged at this, He did fight the Philistines at times very successfully, but he had a weakness for women. He didn't care what kind of women they are. And we know that very famously Delilah deceived him, got his haircut, which was the secret to his great strength. And afterwards, he just became a slave. Last week, there was the film Samson, which was showing in some movies around here, and I had the opportunity to see that with my wife. And there's an interesting portion in the film where Samson was taken prisoner, and I always thought that his eyes were gouged out. But what they depicted on the film, which may be purely invention, it may not be biblical or not, but they used a hot poker to put out his eyes. That was pretty awful to watch. But that's what happened because of his disobedience. God punished him. The Philistines got him because he was consorting with a pagan woman who his parents told him, don't do this. And he said, hey, this is what I want. He got what he wanted, and it cost him his eyes and eventually his life. And the way that happened was when he was made prisoner, he was finally put in a granary, pushing a millstone, which a task you would normally use an animal to do. But his hair grew, and he got his strength back. They didn't realize that. And, the time came that there was an occasion, a feast day. They wanted to make fun of him, which they'd done before. So they put him out in the middle of their big building. And at one point, he found the opportunity to get between the two key pillars in the middle, which held it up. That's how the architecture was done at those times. And with God's strength, he pushed over the two key pillars. The building tumbled down, and he killed thousands of people along with himself. But he got some revenge on the Philistines. A person like this they're strong, they're persistent, they're resourceful, and they're appreciated in times of crisis because of their strength and self-confidence. And they make decisions and act to protect others. Along with this, they want to control the circumstances and surroundings. People naturally tend to follow their directions. They are very uncomfortable with the idea of appearing weak or vulnerable. They want to be self-reliant and protect themselves, have a very positive image there. And because they're strong willpower, they don't have a problem ignoring their critics. A person like this expects others to cooperate and show appreciation for the leadership. When they take charge, they refuse to be used by anyone. They're honest and direct and easy to confront others, unlike some other personality types that have difficulty doing this. When an old problem's been around for a while, they'll come up with a new idea, a way to address it. They do not care for injustice, so they defend the weak and work hard. They're compassionate and loving and promote and provide for others. And Christians should be like that. But their weaknesses that come along with this personality, they can be hurt. They have a bit of a shell. They don't want to be rejected. They may be careless at times about caring for their body and their mind and their soul. Living in the present, they may sacrifice the future. Having a high energy level is a good thing, but you may lose people along the way because everybody can't keep up with you at that level. They may need to learn to deal with pain at times. They may look like they're fearless, but they actually do have a fear of losing control and find it hard to trust others. And they may have unhealthy desires and so work hard, so hard, they become empty and weak. They overdo it. We now come to Jonathan. Jonathan was the son of Saul, the king we've mentioned. He was in line for the kingship, but he didn't act like that. He didn't have the attitude, hey, I'm the king's son. I'm just waiting for my time. He actually, at one point, was led by the Spirit to go out with his armor bearers and fight the Philistines. Just the two of them. They took on a group of Philistines and killed them all. He was David's best friend, and he was part of the royal court, of course, where David was found oftentimes playing the harp. But he would not help Saul kill him. He was a good friend to David. He helped defend him, and David, was eventually ended up becoming a king, as it was prophesied. And Jonathan didn't have any problem with this at all. If you and I were in a position, we're the king's son and waiting in line for the crown, for the throne, we probably would have acted differently. But that's not how Jonathan did. He was a great, dependable friend of David. He ended up dying in a battle against the Philistines with his father Saul. Still, supporting his friend David. A person like this is very supportive. They're diplomatic. They're loyal, as he was to David. And they're discerning, can see what's going on, understand situations of people. He is a great, committed friend. Sacrificed himself, to a fault. Put aside personal gain and just to maintain unity. Those are characteristics Jonathan had, and people are like this. They're relationship experts. People feel good around them because they feel accepted, they feel comfortable. They think positive about other people, and they calm the waters. Oh, the waters is an old phrase, because they don't get angry very quickly. And they'll change their mind, they'll change their positions. They work for harmony, for togetherness. But with their strong desire for togetherness, they really uncomfortable with the idea of being disconnected from other people. They're always trying to make connections. Being disconnected or looking at a situation where it won't work out makes them very uncomfortable. They want to break down the obstacles. They may procrastinate and avoid difficult situations and confrontations. So they're not going to go out and ruffle feathers and bother people. They ease people's hurts. So they're the great mediators. They're facilitators to resolve differences. They're patient, trust people, have a kind nature. But on the opposite side, since they dislike conflict so much, maybe there's something that needs to be dealt with, and they don't want to do that. They may end up actually faking peace just to avoid confrontation with someone, which means later on the problem's still there, still got to be dealt with, but because of their personality, they just backed away with it. So tough times are hard for them to deal with because they may disengage, ignore them, but they still want to help other people. Sometimes those problems that they haven't dealt with come up, and they still got to deal with them, and they're bitter. They're not happy about that at all. It's just against their nature to face things on. They sacrifice for other people, but they may end up ignoring their own needs at the time. The question that we want to consider here today is, who are you like? Did you perhaps see in one of these Bible characters your personality, characteristics of yourself that can better help you understand? For example, Joseph. Joseph had a strong moral character. He was in the face of temptation. He didn't just stare it down. He ran away from it. He was disciplined, but a little bit afraid of his feelings. The feelings he couldn't deal with too well, so he comes across as being cold. Get frustrated with people fairly easily. A person with this personality might be seen as a priest or a leader in the church. How about Abraham? He was obedient, sacrificial. He was very faithful. He listens, cares, helps, but also needs to be needed. Works to please, so it can become a little egotistical, trying to please other people. Could make a good deacon. How about Jacob? He was strong and persevering. By hook or by crook, he's going to overcome all the obstacles. A hard worker with all sorts of talents. But he's self-seeking, centered, wants to be admired. He's not terribly honest. So you wouldn't want him for a treasurer, but he might make a church builder, a planner. Or how about someone like David? He's creative, passionate, expresses feelings, loves to live and to create, but he can struggle with feelings, can be a little discontented because it's so passionate to have so many feelings. Make a good musician or an artist. How about Luke? A bookworm, an analyst. He's very intelligent, can resist the crowd, tell him stuff, if it doesn't match up with the facts and evidence, it's not going to fly, not with him. He wants perfection, but may end up looking down on other people. They don't cut it. But he could make a good theologian or a teacher. Or Timothy, committed, responsible, reliable. Can make discerning choices, even out alone, which he was for many times, but doesn't have a lot of self-confidence, and may deal with this by blaming other people or avoiding situations or getting angry. But makes a great helper, and we certainly need lots of helpers. Solomon, a man who was curious and inventive, enjoys life and adventure, quick to forgive, not a grudge holder, makes quick decisions, seeks satisfaction, but may end up doing excessively, likes all these things, and may be a bit greedy and just wants more experiences, more things, and may ignore the real issues. Might make a good Pathfinder leader. Young people, like people like that. How about Samson? Strong, courageous, lots of self-confidence, a great leader. He's compassionate and no problem confronting things. Go right on into it. Hey, we'll duke it out. I can deal with it. and won't be used, but does expect people to cooperate with him. And fears rejection, wants to be accepted and may not take care of himself, wants to control, and has some unhealthy desires. It's a weakness there. Could make a good security guard, maybe an example in an exercise club. How about Jonathan? He's a faithful friend who put other people first. It wasn't himself first, other people. He was a human relations expert, put people at ease. He had a hard time dealing with confrontation in difficult situations. Couldn't make a great friend or a negotiator, a counselor. Who are you like? That's the question for today. Hopefully you've recognized in some of these Bible characters people that are like you that you would like to be more like, well, I shouldn't say be more like, that you can harmonize with and recognize their strengths so you can employ them, and the weaknesses so you can avoid those and not be crippled in your Christian walk and the way you relate to others. Where is your place in the vineyard is the question I'd like to leave you with today.